Master Sergeant Loren Hayes had stood in a lot of uncomfortable situations during his 28 years of service, but the throne chamber of the Xylar Empire was setting new standards for hostile environments. Not because of the atmosphere, though the humid, particulate-heavy air would be irritating if he weren't in a sealed environmental suit, but because of the hundreds of alien eyes watching him with expressions ranging from contempt to active hostility. The Xylar were an imposing species. Tall, elegant, with skin that shifted through subtle colors based on emotion, and those distinctive elongated ears that could detect frequencies humans couldn't hear. Right now, most of the court's skin was showing variations of dismissive gold or skeptical green. Colors the human delegation's cultural liaison had warned meant they considered the proceedings beneath their notice. Loren stood with the human diplomatic team in the petitioner's area, a designated space that was positioned lower than the throne, symbolic hierarchy made literal through architecture. He was in full environmental gear. Sealed suit, helmet with reflective visor, integrated life support. Standard protocol for humans in Xylar atmosphere, which was technically breathable but uncomfortable for extended periods. The proceedings had been going on for 4 hours. The Xylar claimed the border incident was justified self-defense. The human delegation insisted it was massacre. Loren had been first responder to the site, arrived with the relief team 6 hours after the shooting stopped. He'd seen what was left. The human delegation presents evidence that is entirely circumstantial. A Xylar military advisor was arguing, his skin the confident gold of someone who believed he'd already won. Visual records can be misinterpreted. Forensic analysis is inconclusive. They ask this court to condemn our forces based on assumptions and emotional appeals. Queen Zithara sat on her throne of living crystal, her skin a shade of gold so deep it bordered on bronze, contempt, according to the liaison, mixed with boredom. She'd been dismissing human testimony for hours, clearly considering the entire proceeding a formality rather than genuine inquiry. Your Majesty, the human ambassador tried again, we have an eyewitness who can provide direct testimony about the scene. Master Sergeant Hayes was first on site. We have heard from your delegation extensively, the Queen interrupted, her voice carrying harmonics that made Loren's suit sensors spike. More words will not change the fundamental weakness of your position. You ask us to accept your interpretation of events over the sworn testimony of our own military forces. We ask you to hear from someone who saw the aftermath with his own eyes, Ambassador Chen persisted. The Queen's skin flickered irritation purple. Very well, let this, Master Sergeant Hayes, approach and provide his testimony. She gestured impatiently. Loren stepped forward, his boots making soft sounds on the chamber floor. He'd done this before, stood before hostile authorities and provided testimony they didn't want to hear. He knew how to keep his voice level, his body language non-threatening, his words precise. He stopped at the designated position and waited. Protocol dictated the Queen speak first. Queen Zithara studied him for a long moment, her ears tilting in what the liaison had said was the superior position, looking down at lesser beings. You are the human who claims to have witnessed evidence of atrocity, she said. Not a question, an accusation phrased as statement. I am the human who responded to the border colony 6 hours after your forces withdrew, Your Majesty, Loren replied. His suit's external speakers rendered his voice flat and mechanical, another barrier between him and the court. And you stand before this court in full armor, hiding behind technology, the Queen continued. How convenient, how very human, to accuse others while concealing yourself. Loren said nothing. This was heading somewhere and interrupting would only make it worse. Remove your helmet, Queen Zithara commanded, not a request, not a suggestion. A direct order delivered with the full weight of royal authority. The chamber went quiet. Even the ambient sounds of whispered conversations and subtle movements ceased. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. Your Majesty, the environmental protocols are in place for legitimate health reasons. The treaty permits. I am aware of what the treaty permits, the Queen interrupted. I am also aware that I set the terms of proceedings in my own court. If this human wishes to accuse my people of crimes, he will do so with his face visible to those he accuses. I will not hear testimony from faceless armor. The ambassador looked at Lauren, expression clearly asking, "What do you want to do?" Lauren understood what this was. Power play. Establish dominance. Force the human to comply with commands that made him uncomfortable, that overrode even treaty provisions, demonstrating that the Xyler controlled this proceeding absolutely. He could refuse, could cite the treaty, could force a diplomatic incident that would probably end the inquiry without resolution, or he could comply and give his testimony uncomfortable but audible. Lauren reached for his helmet seals. The ambassador made a sound of protest, but Lauren was already disengaging the locks. The seals hissed softly as pressure equalized. He lifted the helmet carefully, proper protocol even in this moment of forced compliance, and held it at his side. The Xyler atmosphere hit immediately. Humid, thick, carrying mineral scents his implant couldn't quite categorize. Not unpleasant, just different. His throat itched immediately, the particulates irritating human respiratory systems even when the air was technically breathable. He kept his expression neutral, refused to give them the reaction they wanted, discomfort, submission, vulnerability. Just stood there, face visible, meeting the Queen's gaze with the steady calm of someone who'd done this before. Queen Zithara started to speak. "Now, you will provide your testimony without the barrier of..." She stopped, mid-sentence, mid-word. Her skin, which had been that dismissive contemptuous gold, flickered rapidly through colors. Surprise white, recognition blue, something the translator tagged as profound uncertainty purple. Her ears, which had been in that superior tilted-back position, shifted forward to attention. Full attention. The kind of focus that suggested she was seeing something completely unexpected. The chamber went absolutely quiet. Every Xyler was staring at Lauren, and their skin colors were synchronizing in a way that suggested collective shock rippling through the court. Lauren stood still, helmet at his side, his free hand relaxed, not defiant, not aggressive, just present, waiting. The Queen leaned forward slightly, studying his face with an intensity that made several advisors shift nervously. Her skin was still cycling through colors too rapidly for the translator to keep up. "You." She started, then stopped again. Her ears were fully forward now, complete attention, possibly respect, definitely recognition of something significant. She wasn't looking at his eyes. She was looking at the left side of his face, at the 3 parallel scars that ran from his temple to his jaw. Scars Lauren had carried for so long he barely remembered they were there. The silence in the throne chamber was profound. Not the silence of waiting for someone to speak, but the heavy silence of an entire court collectively holding its breath. Lauren remained still, though his throat was already protesting the Xyler atmosphere. He didn't cough, didn't show discomfort, just waited for whatever was happening to resolve itself, his face visible and apparently triggering a reaction he didn't understand. Queen Zithara's skin had settled into a deep blue that the translator tagged as profound respect or remembrance. Her expression had transformed completely. The contempt was gone, replaced with something complex that Lauren couldn't quite read but recognized as significant. "You bear the scars of Kelthara," she said finally. Her voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced with something quieter, almost reverent. Lauren touched his left cheek reflexively, fingers tracing the 3 parallel lines he'd stopped noticing years ago. The scars were part of his face now, no more remarkable to him than the gray in his hair or the lines around his eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty," he confirmed simply. The Queen's ears were completely forward, full attention in a way that suggested this mattered enormously. "You fought in the Kelthara intervention, on the surface. In the deep zones where the atmosphere was toxic and the wildlife was. She paused, searching for a word. Aggressive. I was part of the relief forces, Lauren said. After the ecological collapse, we were trying to evacuate population centers before the biosphere failed completely. The Xylar sent forces to Kelthara as well, the Queen said, and now her skin had deepened to an even richer blue. 3 of my own offspring served in that intervention. Only 2 returned. Murmurs rippled through the court, understanding spreading among the Xylar nobles, context that Lauren didn't have but that clearly carried enormous weight. An elderly advisor stepped forward, his own skin shifting to remembrance blue, his ears bearing scars that suggested he'd seen combat. Your Majesty speaks truth. The Kelthara intervention cost us dearly. We lost 2,000 of our finest soldiers trying to evacuate populations from a world that was killing everything on its surface. As did we, Lauren said quietly. Every species that sent forces to Kelthara lost people. The ecology was failing faster than anyone could evacuate. We saved maybe 30% of the indigenous population. The rest. He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Everyone who'd served on Kelthara knew how that sentence ended. Queen Zithara descended from her throne, an action so unexpected that several advisors gasped audibly. Xylar queens didn't leave their thrones during proceedings. It broke every protocol of royal hierarchy. But she walked down the steps and approached Lauren directly, stopping a respectful distance away. Her skin was still that deep remembrance blue, and her ears had shifted to a position that suggested she was listening to every sound he made with complete attention. The scars on your face, she said, gesturing to the pattern, are from Kelthara's razorhawks, the flying predators that attacked anything that moved during the collapse. They hunted in coordinated packs, and their talons left distinctive marks, 3 parallel lines, always on the face or neck because they targeted the head. She studied the scars with an expression that might have been reverence. Those scars cannot be faked. The pattern is too distinctive, the depth too precise. Every species that fought on Kelthara's surface carries them, and every species that fought their lost people they loved. Lauren had known the scars were from razorhawks. He'd been there when he got them, after all. But he hadn't realized they were distinctive enough to be recognized decades later, or that they carried such significance to other species who'd served. I was on the surface for 8 months, Your Majesty, he said. Until the last evacuation ship left, we kept pulling people out until there was no one left to save. Then you lost people, the Queen said, not a question. A certainty born from her own family's loss. Everyone who served on Kelthara lost people, Lauren replied. The razorhawks were just one threat among many. The atmosphere was toxic without filters. The plant life was releasing chemicals that dissolved most materials. The ground itself was unstable as tectonic activity increased. We lost soldiers to everything from equipment failure to structural collapse to wildlife attacks to simple exposure when suits failed. His throat was really protesting now. The Xylar atmosphere was irritating enough that he could feel his airways constricting slightly. He didn't reach for his helmet, didn't show the discomfort. We lost 37% of the human forces sent to Kelthara, he continued. I don't know the Xylar casualty rate, but I know we worked alongside your people in the deep zones. I remember seeing Xylar soldiers holding positions so evacuation ships could load civilians. I remember your medics treating anyone who needed it, regardless of species. I remember. He paused, a specific memory surfacing. I remember a Xylar officer, ears decorated with silver, skin that shifted to command purple, who stayed behind to manually override a shelter's doors when the automated systems failed. Got the civilians out. Didn't make it to the extraction point before the roof collapsed. The Queen's skin flickered through several colors rapidly. That was my eldest daughter, Zithara. She held the rank of High Commander and led the Xylar evacuation efforts in the northern continent. I didn't know her name, Lauren said quietly, But I saw her work. She saved hundreds, maybe thousands. She did, the Queen agreed, and now there was moisture in her eyes. Apparently Xylar could weep. And she died doing it, as did so many others. The Kelthara intervention taught us that some catastrophes are too large for any one species to face alone, that we must work together or watch worlds die. She turned to address her court, her voice carrying across the chamber. This human stands before us bearing scars that prove he has already witnessed mass death. He has already stood in the aftermath of ecological collapse and tried to save. Lauren took a breath, the humid Xylar atmosphere making his throat itch, but his voice remained steady. I saw a pattern I recognized from Kelthara, Your Majesty, not ecological collapse, but the aftermath of systematic violence conducted with precision and intent. The court's collective intake of breath was audible. "Explain," the Queen commanded, though her voice was gentler than it had been at the preceding start. At Kelthara, we learned to read scenes quickly. You had to, because conditions changed constantly, and you needed to assess situations before the environment killed you. You learned to recognize patterns, where people ran, where they took shelter, where they died. You learned the difference between chaos and coordination, between panic and strategy. Lauren's hands moved slightly, unconscious gestures as memory overlay vision. When I arrived at the border colony, the first thing I noticed was the precision. Bodies were positioned in ways that showed they'd been caught in coordinated fire patterns. Multiple firing positions covering overlapping fields. Professional military tactics executed with discipline. That could indicate our forces were defending themselves effectively, an advisor interjected. It could, Lauren agreed. Except the defensive positions were all on the colony side. The human structures showed evidence of being fortified after the fact, makeshift barriers, overturned furniture, desperate attempts to create cover. Meanwhile, the approach vectors showed your forces had established firing positions, with clear sight lines before engagement began. He met the Queen's gaze directly. At Kelthara, we learned to recognize ambush patterns. We saw them often enough, predators setting up coordinated attacks on evacuation routes. This was the same pattern, positions established, fields of fire calculated, defenders caught in prepared kill zones. You are speculating based on your interpretation, another advisor started. I am observing based on evidence, Lauren interrupted, his voice harder now. The civilian shelter had been breached with precision charges placed on structural weak points. The doors were blown inward, meaning the charges were set from outside. Inside, we found 43 bodies. Mostly children and elderly who'd been moved to the shelter specifically because they couldn't fight or flee. The Queen's skin had gone pale blue, sorrow or distress. Continue. The shelter could have been bypassed. If your forces were defending themselves from an armed threat, there was no tactical reason to breach it. The armed colonists were positioned at the perimeter. The shelter was interior, clearly marked as civilian refuge, and not participating in combat. Lauren's voice remained level, but there was weight behind the words. Someone made a decision to breach it anyway, to eliminate everyone inside. That's not self-defense, that's elimination. The elderly advisor who'd mentioned Kelthara earlier spoke up, his skin troubled purple. These are serious accusations, Master Sergeant. You claim our forces deliberately targeted non-combatants. I claim that the evidence at the scene shows coordinated military action against civilian targets that posed no threat. Whether that was official policy, individual commander initiative, or breakdown in discipline, I cannot determine. But I can state with certainty that what I saw was not defensive action against armed threats. Lauren's throat was really protesting now. He could feel his airways getting more irritated, breathing becoming slightly labored. He still didn't reach for his helmet. At Kelthara, he continued, we faced situations where we had to make impossible choices. Prioritize one evacuation over another. Abandon positions to save lives. Sometimes people died because we couldn't save everyone, but we never targeted civilians who posed no threat. We never breached shelters full of children because it was tactically convenient. He gestured to the scars on his face. These scars came from razorhawks that attacked while I was covering an evacuation point. I held that position for 6 hours with 3 other soldiers while ships loaded civilians. Human, Xyler, indigenous Keltheran didn't matter. Everyone got on those ships. The Hawks killed one of my team, tore my face open. We stayed until the ships were loaded because that was the mission. Save lives, not take them. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, her skin cycling through complex colors. Finally, she turned to her military advisors. I want full internal review of the border incident. Complete records, all tactical communications, individual soldier reports. I want to know what my forces did and why they did it. Your Majesty, one advisor protested, to question our own military based on human testimony. Based on the testimony of someone who survived Kelthara, the Queen interrupted. Someone who knows the difference between impossible choices made in crisis and deliberate targeting of the defenseless. Someone whose own face bears proof of sacrifice made to save civilians rather than harm them. She looked back at Lauren. Master Sergeant Hayes, I am suspending these proceedings for 3 days while I conduct internal review. You may reseal your helmet. Your testimony has been heard and will be given full weight in my investigation. Lauren bowed slightly, respect without submission, and carefully resealed his helmet. The filtered air hit his lungs like relief, the irritation in his throat beginning to ease immediately. As the court began to disperse, a Xyler official approached, older, with ears bearing multiple scars and skin that showed faint discoloration from old injuries. Master Sergeant Hayes, the official said quietly, I am General Vethros. I served on Kelthara in the deep zones, when the Queen saw your scars. He paused. In our culture, those who served on Kelthara are honored beyond normal rank or station. You carry marks that cannot be faked, that prove service rendered when the galaxy needed everyone who could stand in toxic atmosphere and keep standing. I did what needed doing, Lauren said, his voice mechanical through the helmet speakers again. Same as everyone else who served. You could have mentioned Kelthara when you first testified, General Vethros observed. Leveraged that service to give your words more weight. Didn't seem relevant, Lauren replied. I was there to testify about the border colony, not my service record. The general's skin shifted to thoughtful blue. Most would have used every advantage. You had proof of honored service visible on your face, and you said nothing until the Queen recognized the scars herself. The truth should carry its own weight, Lauren said, regardless of who speaks it. 3 days later, Queen Zithara reconvened the proceedings. The throne chamber was packed. Word had spread about the human with Kelthara scars, and apparently that mattered enormously in Xyler culture. Lauren stood with the human delegation, helmet sealed, anonymous behind reflective visor, but now the court knew what was beneath it. The Queen's skin was solemn purple as she addressed the assembly. This court has completed internal review of the border colony incident. What we have discovered brings great shame to the Xyler Empire and to those who serve in our military forces. Murmurs rippled through the Xyler nobles, skin colors shifting to shocked white and distressed purple. The evidence confirms Master Sergeant Hayes's testimony, the Queen continued. The border incident was not self-defense. It was coordinated military action targeting a civilian population that posed no significant threat. The civilian shelter was breached despite containing no combatants and posing no tactical obstacle. 43 individuals, including 27 children, were killed in that shelter after it was secured. Her skin darkened to deep purple, profound shame mixed with anger. The commander responsible attempted to suppress evidence and filed false reports, claiming defensive action against armed resistance. These reports have been proven false by our own tactical communications records and individual soldier testimonies. She looked directly at Lauren. Master Sergeant Hayes's observations were accurate in every significant detail. His assessment that this was elimination rather than self-defense has been confirmed by our internal investigation. The Queen gestured to a group of Xylar military officers standing to the side, their ears stripped of decorations. The officers responsible for this atrocity have been stripped of rank and will face criminal proceedings under Xylar military law. Reparations will be offered to the affected colony, and this court formally apologizes to the human delegation for dismissing their legitimate concerns. Ambassador Chen stood. Your Majesty, we appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation and your commitment to justice. The commitment is not mine alone, the Queen replied. Master Sergeant Hayes provided testimony that forced us to examine our own actions honestly. His presence, his scars, reminded us of what we learned together on Kelthara, that we are better when we work together, that we must hold ourselves accountable when we fail. She descended from her throne again. Apparently this was becoming a habit, and approached Lauren directly. Master Sergeant Hayes, would you unseal your helmet? She asked. Not a command this time, a request. Lauren glanced at Ambassador Chen, who nodded slightly. He unsealed and removed the helmet, the humid atmosphere hitting his respiratory system immediately but tolerably. Queen Zithara studied his face, the scars, the gray hair, the lines that came from years of service. In Xylar culture, we have a tradition. Those who served on Kelthara are considered Velkara, honored witnesses. People who saw the worst of what the galaxy can inflict and chose to stand against it anyway. Who carry physical proof of sacrifice made in service of saving lives. She reached up and touched her own face, indicating where Lauren's scars ran on his. These marks are sacred to us. They represent the price paid when species work together to face catastrophe. They remind us that we are capable of both great cruelty and great sacrifice. The Queen's skin shifted to warm gold, not contempt this time but deep respect. When I ordered you to remove your helmet, I intended it as power play, to establish dominance, to make you uncomfortable. She paused. Instead, I was reminded that authority built on making others uncomfortable is hollow. That true authority comes from recognition of truth, not enforcement of hierarchy. She actually bowed to Lauren. The court made collective sounds of shock. Xylar queens didn't bow. You stood in this chamber and spoke truth when it would have been easier to remain silent, she said. You carried scars earned saving lives and used them not as leverage, but as proof that you knew the difference between tragedy and atrocity. You did not demand we hear you. You simply spoke, and truth spoken calmly by someone who earned the right to speak, it commands attention all its own. Lauren didn't know how to respond to a queen bowing to him. Your Majesty, I just told you what I saw. Exactly, the Queen replied, straightening. You told us what you saw, backed by experience that taught you to see clearly. That is worth more than any amount of diplomatic maneuvering or political pressure. Later, after the proceedings formally concluded and reparations were negotiated, General Vethros approached Lauren one final time. The Queen has ordered that your testimony be entered into our military training programs, the general said. As example of what Velkara means, not just physical scars from Kelthara, but the willingness to speak truth regardless of personal cost. I didn't think I was doing anything special, Lauren admitted. I just answered her questions honestly. That is what makes it special, General Vethros replied. You had every reason to use your Kelthara service as leverage, to demand recognition, to make the Queen's power play backfire dramatically. Instead, you just stood there, let the scars speak for themselves when they were noticed, provided testimony without performance. The general's skin shifted to contemplative blue. My people respect power. We respect hierarchy. We respect command. But what you showed us is that there is a different kind of authority, the kind that doesn't need to be claimed because it simply is. The authority of someone who has seen enough to recognize truth, and speaks it calmly because truth doesn't need volume to be heard. As Lauren prepared to leave the Xylar capital, he stood one final time before Queen Zithara in a private audience. "Master Sergeant Hayes," she said, "you interrupted my command mid-sentence simply by removing your helmet. That has never happened before in my 2 centuries of rule." "I didn't mean to interrupt, Your Majesty." "I know. That's what made it so profound." She studied him thoughtfully. "I stopped speaking because I saw something I didn't expect. Not defiance, not submission, just presence. Someone who had earned the right to stand in that space, who carried proof of service rendered when worlds needed saving, whose very face bore witness to sacrifice made for people who weren't his species or his responsibility." She was quiet for a moment. "Authority shifts not when it is seized, but when it is recognized. I recognized in you something I respect more than political power or military might. Earned gravity. The weight of someone who has stood in places that demanded everything and chose to give it anyway." "I was just doing my job," Lauren said. "Yes," the Queen agreed. "And sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is someone who simply does their job, speaks their truth, and lets their presence communicate what words cannot." Lauren left the Xylar Empire with reparations secured, justice in motion, and the understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand still, speak plainly, and let your scars tell the story of who you are and what you've survived. The Queen had ordered him to unseal his helmet as power play. Instead, she'd found someone whose authority needed no performance, whose truth needed no volume, and whose presence, scarred and steady, spoke louder than any command. Sometimes even queens stop mid-sentence when faced with something undeniable. And sometimes that something is just a human face bearing the marks of service, rendered when the galaxy needed everyone who could stand in toxic atmosphere and keep standing, because lives needed saving and truth needed witnessing. The scars on Lauren's face would fade eventually, though they'd never disappear completely. But the recognition in Queen Zithara's eyes when she saw them, when she understood what they meant, that would echo through Xylar human relations for generations. Because truth recognized needs no enforcement. It simply is. The alien queen orders a human to unseal his helmet. She stops mid-sentence and the chamber goes quiet. Master Sergeant Lauren Hayes stands in the throne chamber of the Xylar Empire, testifying about a border colony massacre that Xylar forces claim was justified self-defense. He arrived first on scene, saw what was left, and his testimony threatens to expose what really happened. Queen Zithara, ruler for 2 centuries, has been dismissing human evidence for hours with barely concealed contempt. When Lauren is called forward, she demands he remove his environmental helmet, a power play meant to strip away anonymity, force discomfort, and establish that even treaty protections can be overridden by royal command. As Lauren complies, unsealing his helmet and revealing his face, the Queen begins a dismissive statement about honesty requiring visibility. She stops mid-sentence. Her skin flickers from contemptuous gold to shocked recognition. The chamber goes absolutely silent as every Xylar stares at 3 parallel scars running down Lauren's face, distinctive marks from Kalthara's razorhawks. Proof. He served in the intervention that cost every species dearly, including 3 of the Queen's own children. This Sci-Fi Stories audiobook explores human quiet gravity and recognition, earned through scars rather than claimed through words, revealing how truth spoken